Years on.
I regard it as the starting point for the modern age of investigative reporting that is now 40 years old and still going strong.
Eamon O'Neill investigates the journalistic legacy.
We're now in another anniversary of Watergate. Does this cheer you up?
Well, it would cheer me up if we drew some pretty obvious lessons from it.
What motivates the modern investigative journalist?
I think an awful lot of people who are successful at the long-term investigative work are driven by quite deep emotional demons.
Archive on 4, Heroes and Hacks, Saturday night at 8 on Radio 4.
If the crisis in the world's bee population is as bad as most experts say, it's going to take more than a limited ban on the use of one class of insecticide to put it right. For Costing the Earth this week, Tom Heap asks what it's going to take to get bees off their knees.
Bumblebees can do this thing that pretty much no other bee can do. And if you imagine a tomato flower, tight shut, you can't see the pollen, it doesn't want to give up its pollen. The bumblebee comes along and it wraps itself around the flower, the tomato, the yellow tomato flower, disconnects its wings and vibrates its flight muscles inside the thorax at something like 400 hertz, which I understand is middle C. And this is what people do in greenhouses, you know, with electric toothbrushes and tuning forks. So the bumblebee does this and the whole flower starts to shake and vibrate, and then it opens and releases its pollen onto the bumblebee. And that's why I love bumblebees.
There's undoubtedly something cheering, instinctively feel-good about being amongst bees as they go about their business on a spring day. You can see why Bridget Strawbridge gets so enthusiastic. She studies bees, records them, blogs about bees, gives talks about them, spends hours tramping the hills near her Worcestershire home in search of them. And she believes the European vote to ban neonicotinoid insecticides was essential for their survival.
It's not just habitat loss and the weather, there is something else. But the bottom line for me is if there is doubt, they should be banned, not the other way around, because once they're gone, it's too late.
Bridget Strawbridge and many other campaigners are celebrating after last week's European Commission decision to ban the pesticides, or more accurately, restrict their use for 2 years. The British government voted against it, siding with pesticide manufacturers, farmers and some scientists. But the National Farmers Union spokesman, Chris Hartfield, is claiming more surprising allies.
I think it's extremely telling that, those at the coalface of this issue, beekeepers themselves, and the associations that are representing them, aren't calling for a ban on the use of neonicotinoids. And those that are particularly at the moment being most vocal about this issue are organisations with pre-existing anti-pesticide agendas. I think, put simply, we will not be able to see any benefits of not using neonicotinoids.
These so-called neonics became widely used on farms 10 years ago to replace organophosphate and pyrethroid insect killers. Chris Hartfield doubts bees will benefit from turning back the clock.
In all of these things, there is a risk of unintended consequences. As I said, the alternatives to neonicotinoids are older chemistry. These aren't benign things. Ultimately, like neonicotinoids, they're chemicals designed to kill insects. They all will have an impact, and that is something that unfortunately has not been properly investigated.
In this week's Costing the Earth, we'll hear more from those who welcome the ban, but also look beyond the spat over a particular agrochemical towards the wider plight of bees and other pollinators across the world. Britain's only professor of apiculture will tell us that blaming pesticides risks letting the real culprit off the hook. But first, most experts would agree with Professor Simon Potts of Reading University that bee decline is a big problem.
We should be very concerned because the problem not only affects people in the countries in the developing world where they're losing these bees, but so much of kind of Europe and North America's food comes from these areas. So it's a global problem. And the fact that we don't have all the evidence doesn't mean we should just sit back and let it happen. We need to kind of be proactive to protect these pollinators because in the long term, food security is such an important thing for us all.
And it is a complex problem.
There's a lot of interest in pesticides at the moment, but we need to remember that there's other things that are causing problems too. So we've got the loss of habitats, good good flowers for food for the bees, also nesting places for bees, those are missing. So pesticides on their own may be a problem, but pesticides in combination with good habitat being lost becomes the real killer.
Scientists have been gathering evidence that neonics harm bees for several years now. Professor Christian Krupke, an entomologist who specialises in pests of corn and soybeans at Purdue University in Indiana, was called to investigate piles of dead bees at corn planting time in 2010. He worked out that they were being poisoned by dust blowing from seed drills.
I would say 2010 and into 2011 it became clear, because the results from all of our tests of these dead and dying bees were showing positive tests for the neonicotinoids, clothianidin, which is called Poncho here in the United States on corn, and thiamethoxam, which is called Cruiser. And so those compounds were showing up repeatedly and consistently. And combine that with the timing that we were finding these dead bees, which coincided largely with corn planting, and the fact we also